Warren Buffett is here. As you know, he is perhaps the world's most respected investor. He is also chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He has been on this program many times. I last spoke with him over a year ago at the peak of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. At that time, he said that America had been struck by an economic Pearl Harbor. But much has changed since then, and he's here to tell us how he views a global and American economy in recovery. His own company reflects the progress made in recent months. Last week, Berkshire Hathaway struck a $26 billion deal to buy all of Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, the largest acquisition in company history. He called the deal an all-in wager on the American economy. He is in New York for a town hall event that he held with Bill Gates at Columbia University yesterday. He graciously agreed to stay over in New York an extra night, and I am pleased to have a good friend of this program and a good friend of mine back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm pleased to be here.
It's great to see you. It has been, certainly from the middle of 2008 to the middle of 2009, one incredible year.
One incredible year. And one to a lifetime, I hope.
Yes. Tell me about it for you.
Well, it really was an extraordinary time in this country. We came closer to a financial meltdown than certainly any time I've ever seen, and probably in certain respects there was even more panic than the Great Depression because it came on so fast and so unexpected, and the whole country wanted to deleverage, corporations, individuals, and fortunately we had a government that responded. And it was when we talked last that it was a little question of whether Congress would respond like they should. They finally did, and I felt they would in the end. I mean, in the end, they come together for things that are this vital to the country. But we had the right people in Washington. If we'd had a group that had behaved like a deer in the headlights, that deer would have gotten run over.
Yeah. So Paulson and Bernanke and Geithner were the right people at the right time. And you don't know what might have happened if others had been in those positions of power.
No, I can think of others. I'm not going to name them, but I can think of others where the ending would have been with us in the abyss rather than just peering down into it.
You made some investments during that period,
right?
General Electric, Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs.
But you just pulled out the big elephant gun.
We may have used most of our powder in that one, too.
You said, I stretched to the last nickel for this one.
Yeah. Why
did you do it?
Well, I felt it was an opportunity to buy a business that is going to be around for 100 or 200 years. That's interwoven with the American economy in a way that if the American economy prospers, the business will prosper. It is the most efficient way of moving goods in the country. It's the most environmentally friendly way of moving goods, and both those things are going to be very important. But the biggest thing is the United States is going to do well. I mean, we can't move the railroad to China or India. At least I haven't figured out how to do that. So it's a little like the Rivers of that song about New York. We have to make it here, or we can't make it anywhere.
Well, Frank Sinatra.
But it does move It moves a ton of goods 470 miles on 1 gallon of diesel. It replaces a train replaces 280 trucks on the road, and it emits far less into the atmosphere that's damaging than trucking. And it moves 40%. When I'm talking about the whole rail industry, it moves 40% of the goods plus.
And you have new port of entries like Houston that will bring in a lot of goods through the Panama Canal.
And we're going to have more people in this country, and they're going to be using more goods over time. And sure, there's a bad year from time to time. And in the next 100 years, there'll probably be 15 bad years, and I don't know what order they'll appear. But I also know the railroads will be essential to the country.
Now, when you called Charlie Munger and said, I'm thinking about this, did he say, right on, Warren, or did he say, how about this?
Well, if Charlie said right on, Warren, I figured I had the wrong number. No, I mean, that would be the wrong number.
It's not the likely response.
That might be my wife or but Charlie gave a kind of a low-level grumble, and that is real endorsement from Charlie.
But I mean, he also pointed out, it is said that there was this was a regulated industry.
Sure.
This was an industry that was capital intensive.
Very capital intensive.
This was an industry.
You spend money.
It was unionized.
It was unionized. You spend money in this business regularly, every day. You're spending a lot of money, repair track or add rolling stock, whatever it may be. So it's capital intensive, and it is regulated, and it will continue to be regulated. It will continue to be capital intensive. I think that what the service provided by railroads is so important in many ways. I mean, it's the right way to move goods around the country to the extent that you can do it, and it's far more attractive in terms of global warming than using trucks, for example. So it will be here, and if we get a reasonable return on the added capital investment, because it'll take added capital investment, we'll do okay. And
reasonable return's good enough?
Reasonable return's good enough, Charlie. I mean, 50 years ago I was looking for spectacular returns, but I can't get them. I mean, we have $8 or $10 billion to invest every year, and we're in the utility business, and it's the same thing there. I mean, when we build electric generation or something of the sort, we shouldn't expect a spectacular return. We're building things that are essential to society, and people need our services. They really don't have any choice in the case of the electric utilities, for example, and sometimes in case of rail. And we should get a decent return on that. I mean, it's enough to encourage us to keep putting money into the business, but we're not entitled to spectacular returns.
You carry coal.
Well, that's a big one in terms of tonnage, very big.
And if, in fact, we wean ourselves off coal, is that a big problem?
Well, we will wean ourselves off coal over time, but we can't change the 40% of electric generation that comes from coal. We can't change that next week or next month or next year, but we will reduce it over time, and we should reduce it over time.
And you can add other things to carry, and changes will be.
There will be more grain to move, and there'll be more of all kinds of chemicals or whatever it may be. There will be more things moving around this country 10 or 20 or 30 years from now.
Knowing your idea about moats, is it a pleasing idea that no one is likely to get into the railroad business?
Well, if they wanted to reproduce the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, it might take $100 billion or so, and
and 100 billion years.
They'd have to be a real sport.
Yeah. And they also are modernized today, are they not?
I mean, enormously. The railroads. Take a railroad like BNSF. They're moving far more ton miles of product with less in the way of people, less in the way of fuel. Railroads have become far more efficient over the years. There were 1.5 million people employed in the rail industry after World War II. Now there are about less than 200,000 in the United States, and they're moving far more goods. So it's really become efficient. You watch those 130-unit trains double stacked.
You had other railroad companies in your portfolio.
Right.
You're selling them?
I've already sold them. Yeah, I've done that just to facilitate the transaction. I think they're good investments, but I would have held them if this hadn't happened.
When you look at the future, there's also the argument made that this is something that goes with your philosophy today. Get out of cash and get into assets, because we don't know what's going to happen to the dollar.
Well, cash is always a bad investment.
Yes.
I mean, when people said cash is king a year ago, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, cash wasn't producing anything, and it was sure to go down in value over time. On the other hand, you always want to be sure you have enough. I mean, it's like oxygen. You want to be sure it's around, but you don't need to have excessive amounts of it around. And cash, we will always have enough cash around. But anytime we have surplus cash around, I'm unhappy. I mean, I would much rather have good businesses than cash. And we found a chance in the last year, thereabouts, to deploy. We came in with something over $40 billion in cash, and we've got about $20 billion now, and we've had some earnings. So we put a lot of cash to work, and I like that. No, I'd much rather own a good business than have cash.
And it is a hedge against the dollar?
Well, you can say all assets are a hedge against the dollar. I mean, but all you know is that the dollar is going to be worth less 10, 20, 30 years from now. I say worth less, not worthless.
Right.
You want to watch that. But it will be, and that's true of almost every currency that I can think of. The question is how much it depreciates in value. But cash is not a place to
Now, why is that?
Well,
that the dollar is going to be worth less?
Because we'll print more of them in relation to the amount of goods that are moving. If we dropped $1 million of cash into every household in the United States today, everybody would feel very good, except the people that invested in things that were denominated in dollars. And,
Exactly. Exactly.
There will be no tendency toward deflation in this country over time, or in virtually any country.
A tendency toward inflation.
Absolutely.
Okay. In all the conversations we've had, I never thought that I would sit with you and we would talk about a 50-to-1 split.
Yeah,
of the Class B
Right,
stock.
right.
I mean, this had to be a hard one, or not?
Yeah, I think I had a lobotomy one night. I didn't know about it. No, it is not natural for me, but it was needed to facilitate the small shareholders of BNSF getting the same deal as the big shareholders.
Right. Will it also qualify you for the S&P index?
Well, it probably makes it a little more likely over time that we get insured. It makes it easier for S&P because we're by far the largest company that's not in the index, and we'll probably. My guess is that they'll consider us more.
And you'd
for
like
that. I certainly wouldn't mind it, but I don't. I mean, it's not on my wish list for Christmas.
It's not on your high lust list.
No. The big thing is what happens to the value of the company, and the shares will take care of themselves if we build value.
Yeah. When you look at the railroad business, it has a romance to it. You had a railroad track, I guess, in your attic, didn't you? Or somewhere
I still do. I hope they don't make me sell it for antitrust reasons.
Take a look at this tape.
My heart's beating faster after watching that. I throwing Grace Kelly and Marilyn Monroe, I would have paid more.
J.P. Morgan also owned the railroads, didn't he?
Yeah, and he facilitated.
Northern or not?
In fact, there was a huge fight over the Northern Pacific, which was one of the predecessor roads, and you had two factions, and Morgan was lined up on one side. Yeah, no, he was very involved.
Last night at Columbia, you said that the economic panic is over.
Yeah.
Where do you think we are?
Well, I can tell you where we are today. I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, but we've got 70-some businesses, so I get a lot of figures. The panic is over. I mean, now money's flowing. I mean, because we're in a recession, there's not as much demand for money, and money isn't flowing to really dumb projects like it was a few years ago, but money is available now, and the panic is gone, and credit spreads have come down dramatically. But that panic that spilled over into the real economy last fall, really, as it's left real scars on the American public psyche. I mean, the reset of how they spend their money and how they're thinking about their future changed in a big way last fall, and that has not come back. And so, in our businesses, they bottomed. But they're not. There are very few upticks. It's more or less flat right now. But it will come back, Charlie. I want to emphasize that. But it has not changed much so far.
Do you have any sense of timing about that?
I really don't. I mean, I keep watching, and it will come back. And people are not panicked anymore, but they're behaving differently than they did a year ago. And
saving more, taking less risk.
They're taking less risk, and they're more worried about their future. More people are. They have seen something happen that they didn't, wasn't really in the scope of what they thought was possible.
You have said for a long time that we are too much of a consuming society, not enough of a saving society. Will we now become a saving society?
Yeah, we'll probably become a saving society, but of course, the government demands for borrowing will be such that even with a lot of borrowing from abroad, there will be a lot of borrowing required from within the country.
And where's the consumer demand going to come from?
Well, it will come back eventually. I mean, our system will still work, but we have, we talked last year about the patient, being on the floor with a cardiac arrest, and we're not out of the hospital yet, but we will come out of the hospital. The things that made America what it is have not disappeared, and they will assert themselves with time. But if you have way too many houses, it's going to take time to work that off. If you've got a commercial real estate problem where people just borrowed too much money and bought in at too low of cap rates and all of that, that does take time to work off. That's happened to us in the past, though, too. It happened in the 19th century. It happened in the 20th century at various times, and we've always come back stronger.
Commercial real estate is really in trouble.
It's a mess.
You're in the underwear business. You're in the ice cream business. You're also in utilities.
Right.
There was even a depreciation in demand on the part for electricity?
It's amazing. we're in both Iowa and Midwest, and then we're also out in the Pacific Northwest and the mountain states, and everywhere. You expected to see a big drop in industrial demand, but if you take weather-adjusted behavior of residential customers, it fell off, and it was like nothing we've seen since World War II. It doesn't mean that it goes down 20% in residents or anything, but this was an absolutely different experience than anything we've seen since World War II in residential usage.
Is one of the things that are going to come out of this crisis that the demand for products, somebody else is going to have to shoulder that demand, create that demand, other than the American economy?
No, the American economy will come back. It won't be tomorrow, and it won't be exactly the same. But in the end, we've not changed the American people in their capacity to innovate or their excitement about becoming more prosperous and coming up with new ideas. Businesses will be formed, businesses will expand, but not much tomorrow.
You have said we may need more medicine. Meaning more stimulus, more what?
Well, we had a lot of medicine, and we're going to have a lot of after effects from the medicine.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, but the stimulus was not perfectly executed. Nothing's perfectly executed. I mean, it shouldn't be criticizing, but.
Well, but why shouldn't you be criticizing? Don't we learn from that? I mean,
but I mean, I overall, if they get the job done, I don't believe in picking too much at given actions, but. There should have been more infrastructure in there, and they hung a Christmas tree on it. As I said one time, it's sort of like mixing a half a tablet of Viagra with candy. I mean, it would have been better to leave out the candy and have the full pill of Viagra.
But do you think we need a new stimulus because the other one, the previous one, the only one was flawed?
No, I think we can reserve judgment on that. I think just the holiday season will tell us something when it comes. And I would say that so far from what I've seen, I don't think it's going to be that big a holiday season. But we'll know that in a month. And let's see what happens on that.
You've also said that America will still be the best place to invest your money.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of American companies, in terms of everything.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back a couple hundred years, we've gotten where we are, not because we've gotten smarter or not because we work harder. We've got it because we found ways to unleash more of the human potential. And what does that? Well, a rule of law helps. A market system helps. Equality of opportunity helps. All of these things that are still a fundamental part of the American system. As a matter of fact, the American system now is better than it was a couple hundred years ago because until the 19th Amendment, we had half the talent in the United States that really wasn't entitled to do much. So we've got a great system.
But what's happened is that the rest of the world, especially China and India and places like that, have grown and have enormous potential now and that are growing faster than we are.
That's terrific. Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
It means the pie is bigger.
Sure. The world is not a zero-sum game. I mean, if we had our choice of being an island of prosperity in a world of 6.5 billion people, that most of whom were struggling, or being the same country with other people prospering, the latter is much the better choice, particularly in a nuclear world. You don't want billions of people with nuclear capacity envying you and feeling that somehow you've gotten all the goodies of the world. So we will grow slower relative to a China, significantly slower, but they're starting from much lower base.
But at some point, mid-century, they'll have a larger economy than we will.
It's going to be a long time.
You don't believe that, though?
Well, larger on a per capita basis is a long way off.
Not only per capita, but a larger gross economy. They'll have a larger gross domestic product than we will.
If they have 4 times as many people as we have, they will have a larger overall economy. No, they will grow faster than we will grow, but they're starting from a much lower base. I mean, I'll meet some guy on the street today whose net worth will be growing faster than mine on a percentage basis, but if I start with a big enough number, it'll be a while before he catches me.
This is also different for China. They now, have certainly, you are invested in a Chinese automotive and battery company, of which the founder, a 43-year-old entrepreneur, is somebody that you would admire wherever he was from.
That's right. And some of the things
he has a bit of you in him.
Well, yeah, he speaks Chinese. I don't. That fellow's probably going to do remarkable things.
He's the richest man in China now.
That's right. But if he does remarkable things, that's going to be good for the United States. I mean, if he develops better battery technology, we will get it, believe me.
But there's the question that's being raised. In the past, the United States has always been on the cutting edge of technology. Your great friend Bill Gates is testament to that.
Sure.
But are they developing the capacity? He's going to lead in batteries. Somewhere else they say China's going to lead in solar technology. Somewhere else says they're doing more with it. I mean, is this...
Well, we don't know who will
Are we
come
looking at that hard reality?
Well, it's better to have the whole world, the talent of the whole world, working on things like battery technology or whatever it may be. I mean, I'd like, if we can add the resources of a whole bunch of other people to help solve our problems, I'm all for it. If we get there first and they copy us, fine. If we get there first and we copy them, fine. I mean, it is not like they're going to be able to hoard the technology and we'll never see it. So, I'd like to see it just. I like to see the United States come in first on everything, but I don't think it'll be terrible if somebody in China or India comes up with something that enables this country to deal with its problems. We'll get the technology.
Yeah. It may very well be that the world will be waking up. I saw today that President Medvedev basically said, in a sort of stern mission to the Russians, we can't just depend on the export of oil and energy. We have to begin to think about how we restructure and all the things sound like an American speaking about the economic reality of today.
And the reason he's saying that is because it's so darned obvious. I mean, they did count on oil. They've been counting on it too much. But the beauty of it is, we don't have a monopoly on the system. I mean, we can a market system can exist elsewhere, and that does cause people to work on things that other people want. I mean, it's much better than having a central planner.
When you look at today and what we face in terms of the job reality, are we going to have the capacity to create the kind of jobs, or will we have to settle at a new unemployment rate that we're not familiar with?
No, we'll create new jobs. I mean, we've been through all kinds of tough unemployment cycles. In the early '80s being probably the toughest. It really looked tougher not in the finance world, but in 1981, 1982, we were at 10% unemployment, and Volcker was applying, a battle axe to the economy, and people said, Germany and Japan are going to produce everything. What will happen with this country? We've created millions and millions and millions of jobs since then. Who would have thought when Paul Allen and Bill Gates were down there in Albuquerque, eating pizza, drinking Coke at 2 in the morning, that they were a big part of our future. But that's going on right now. I mean, who would have thought the Google guys were doing what they were doing, a few years back? We can't predict what it'll be. I sat there in that room in Columbia last night with 1,000 people. If we'd had the same 1,000 people back in 1790, I'd given some pep talk like this, and they'd leave the place and they'd all go back to their farms and say, that's fine, but what the hell are we going to do? If farm implements get better where there's no jobs. Well, they wouldn't have been thinking about the automobile and the airplane and the electric light, all of that. I can't tell you what it'll be, but I can tell you it'll happen.
You have also said, and have been very clear, that you think in this conversation and every other one, that we had to pour a lot of money at a crisis. And we may very well have presented ourselves with a problem that is as difficult as the crisis.
Yeah. Well, when you use old medicines in unprecedented dosages and even invent some new medicines, as we had to do last fall, there are side effects and after effects, and probably they're somewhat proportional in certain ways to the extreme nature of the dosages. So we cannot keep running fiscal deficits like we are currently without having a lot of consequences over time. And
$1.4 trillion for 2000.
Well, that just, even for a guy like me, I mean,
those are real numbers.
Trillion gets my attention. That has consequences, and we're not saving $1.4 trillion to finance that deficit. And we faced huge deficits in World War II, I mean, relative to the GDP then, to fight a war. And there were inflationary consequences after even a little bit during the war. But
so inflation is inevitable because of the amount of money we poured on this problem.
And then the question is whether, and basically it's Congress. I mean, in the end, Congress is the one that determines the value of the dollar over time. If they follow policies that require us printing too much of it, monetizing debt and all of that sort of thing, dollars will become worth a lot less.
So Congress has to do what?
They have to, once the economy is rolling again, they've got to apply some. They've got to raise taxes. Now the income will go up as the recession ends anyway, but they're going to have to close the gap between expenditures.
They got to find more revenues.
The
expenditures is a harder thing to do than finding the revenues, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, well, go ahead, tell me. Which is easier, cutting the expenditures or raising the revenue?
They've got to do one of the two, because the gap between the two, is as wide as a percentage of GDP. It's wider as a percentage of GDP than we've ever seen, except in wartime.
It's now at what, 10%?
Yeah, that's just a touch over 10%. The gap is.
And what's acceptable?
Huge.
6, 5?
Well, no,
it was at 6 during Reagan.
No, we can work if we have a gap of about 2.5%, and we have sort of normal growth, then debt as a percentage of GDP doesn't grow. So the country gets more valuable over time. I mean, we have more productive capacity and all that. So we can handle more debt, but it should not be. It should be proportional to, in a sense, the wealth and earnings of the country. And we can take a couple percent gap over time and have that debt not grow proportionally. It's about the net outstanding is about 55% of GDP now. Nothing wrong with that. What you don't want it to do is keep climbing. And at a point, it gets out of control, and interest on debt compounds and all of that sort of thing. But of course, in good years, if you're going to average 2%, you better not have 2% be the base, or because you'll get into years like this with 10%, and it'll pull the average up a lot.
This question is asked frequently. Will at some point the deficit and the debt and the decline of the dollar get to a point that people who hold our debt will no longer want to buy it, and then we're in a crisis?
Well, the rest of the world doesn't have much choice, in a sense. I mean, if our current account surplus deficit is $400 billion, we're handing $400 billion of dollars to the rest of the world. They got to buy something with it, and one way or another, they have to buy something in dollars. I mean, if they get those dollars and they buy government bonds of the United States, and then they decide to sell them to buy stocks, they still get dollars when they sell the government bonds. They can choose among assets. They can't really choose not to invest in the United States.
But they can choose as to where else they go for new investments, can they not?
Well, they in effect, if we're running a $400 billion deficit, to pick a figure, the rest of the world is getting $400 billion worth of IOUs of one sort or another in the United States. Now, if they invest that in France, let's say the Chinese buy stuff from France. Now France has got the dollars. I mean, the only way you can bring down that is to actually get rid of the current account deficit over time. But in any event.
And that's having to do with the costs and savings, the consumption savings rate.
But if you run a $1.4 trillion deficit, even if you are exporting $400 billion of IOUs in effect the rest of the world, that leaves another trillion. and that the domestic savers are not going to come up with $1 trillion. I mean, so these numbers are unsustainable over time, what we're doing. It is true, though, that if you keep flooding the world with your debt and people see your fiscal policies are sort of out of control, they're going to get less and less and less enthused about your debt. And then one of two things happen. Either you keep paying more and more to roll over that debt, or you start monetizing it like crazy. And I mean, the Federal Reserve can buy the debt and issue currency for it, but then the currency gets worth less.
But is what you just described the reality we're facing if we don't do something dramatic soon?
Fairly soon. And we still want the economy to come back. I mean, we want to put out the fire. Right. But then make sure.
So worry about that later after we put out the fire.
Then we want to quit just squirting water on those buildings. We have to know when the fire's out.
Yeah, but how do we know that? That's my question.
Oh well, we will know. Unemployment will top out late, but we'll know when the economy's really coming back.
And what will be the indication of that for us?
Well, it'll be retail sales. It'll be automobile sales. It'll be when home construction starts coming back. I mean, there'll be plenty of economic signs. They may be a little late in getting recognized. There's, the data comes a little late, but we'll know. We'll know. We won't know when the turn happens, but 3 or 4 months later, we will know it's happening.
And it's inevitable that's going to happen in the next year or two, or later.
Well, I like 2 better than 1. But when you say inevitable, that doesn't mean it can't happen earlier.
Oh, but I mean, what would you worry about? That we might not come back the way we ought to, that somehow there have been repercussions from this that will have lasting impact?
Well, there'll be some lasting impacts of certain types, but in terms of coming out of it, I don't worry. Now, if you had some big exogenous event, if you had a major, either by a country or by terrorists, sort of a 9/11 squared or something, a huge anthrax attack or something like that, you know,
or oil went to $250 a barrel or something like that.
Oil goes to $250 a barrel. There can be certain exogenous effects that could.
So that kind of thing would worry you the most. It's likely to happen. Otherwise,
yeah, huge geopolitical. I mean, if for some reason another 5 million barrels a day of oil out of the 85 million barrels, got shut off and more or less looked like permanently at the time, there'd be a lot of disruption in this world.
When you look at the lessons we have learned, one was it was, you have suggested, way over-leveraged.
Yeah.
We also experienced a bubble, a housing bubble. We will have other bubbles.
We'll have other bubbles. I'll guarantee you.
Are we going to go back to the same kind of leverage?
Not for a while. We learn lessons, and they last for a while. And the deeper the wounds, to some extent, the longer they last. I was a beneficiary of that. I mean, I got out of school in 1951, and all my competitors were still worried about the Great Depression, and my memory wasn't good enough, so I had forgotten. This will have an impact on thinking for quite a while in certain respects. But fear, greed, folly.
Not going to change.
We haven't gotten rid of those. We get smarter in all kinds of ways. We don't get smarter emotionally.
Why is that?
It's just the way the human animal's put together.
Yeah.
The
memory fades, and all of a sudden the new temptation is there.
Yeah, and plus being greedy can be fun for a while, I guess. Leverage can be fun when it works.
Yeah.
Leverage is one of those things that works 99 times out of 100, and when it doesn't, it's all over.
How do you explain the fact that you always enjoyed making it more than even spending it? You enjoy making it and investing it, but not necessarily spending it.
Well, I have everything I want in life, so there's nothing to spend it on. I mean, I could have 10 houses instead of one. Would I be happier? No way. I could have 10 cars instead of 2 in the house. I wouldn't be happier. It would drive me crazy. I could have a 400-foot boat, and then I'd have a crew of 50 or 60, and some of them be stealing from me, and some of them be sleeping together. I mean, who knows what would be going on? So I don't. If I wanted to be a ship's captain, I'd gone into different professions. I have everything in life I want.
And what you enjoy doing is studying where we are and understanding, trying to do the kind of analysis through conversations and reading and figuring out.
I love working with the people I work with. I love just viewing the human scene, but I have an ideal life. I get to do what I want to do every day. So, and money can't buy any more than that.
What do you think of value-added tax?
Well, I basically don't like it because it's somewhat akin. It isn't the same, but it's somewhat akin to a sales tax. I mean, it has.
It's regressive.
Yeah, it's regressive, and we don't need more regressive taxes in the United States.
That's why you don't like cap and trade.
Yeah, well, that's right. In terms of the way it falls on people, yeah, absolutely. I think that if we're looking for more money, we ought to look to guys like me. I mean, I am still paying a lower rate on dividends and capital gains than my cleaning lady is, in terms of her payroll tax, just to start with. And so I just think that we've gotten so far out of whack in terms of who's been prosperous in recent years, and most of the economy, most people have been left behind. So we learned that a rising tide lifts all yachts.
But there are not a lot of guys like you to start with.
Well, there are some.
But you're the top of the list there with you and Bill. But there is also this: what is an appropriate rate of taxation of people like you? Before, as some conservatives and supply-siders argue, you began to somehow inhibit growth.
Yeah. Well, I worked through all kinds of systems of taxation,
right.
And I worked with rich people, even in the 50s, but in the 60s, and I worked with them when the top rate was 70%. I worked with them when capital gains rates were 39.6%, and not one of them said, it's 1 o'clock, instead of working this afternoon, I think I'll go to the movies because my marginal rate is so high. I mean, if anything, they worked harder, Charlie.
The reason they got rich is because they worked hard.
I never had one person. I had hundreds of people, in the partnership,
right.
And not one of them ever came to me and said, Warren, I've decided to hell with it. 39.6%. I'm not going to invest my money. What would they do with it? Stick it under mattresses?
Does that mean that the American system is, in a sense, a bit unfair and geared to the rich?
Well, I think it has become more geared to the rich as time has gone by, and I think that the rich have, obviously a disproportionate impact, on how Congress behaves. And no,
money and politics.
You basically have to, if you have a very rich country with a great number of super rich, you have to fight against a plutocracy. I mean, the Congress has to be your bulwark for the principles of democracy to win out over a plutocracy, and we've done that well in this country. But it's a constant fight. I mean, K Street is not populated by a whole bunch of people that represent my cleaning woman, but if you look at the Forbes 400, you'll find that they find their way to K Street, and it finds its way to them. Sure,
they have multiple voices on K Street.
Sure, they care.
So what would you do about that?
Well, it's always a problem. And you want a prosperous country, so you want a whole bunch of rich people, but you also want everybody to do reasonably well in something as prosperous as we have. We have $45,000 of GDP per capita in the United States, but we've got almost 60 million people living in households where the top income is 21,000 or less. That's the top of the 60 million people. So we can do better. Now, we have done better over time. I mean, we put in Social Security, and we've done things in the country that have worked in the direction.
Medicare, Medicaid.
Yeah. But a prosperous country should not just be prosperous for the people like me who are wired in a particular way at birth. No credit to me, but I happen to know something about capital allocation. It wasn't, I could have been wired, so I was, I don't know, a great ukulele player. but there's more money in what
sometimes you can be both.
Yeah, well, not often. Not in this case, anyway. But there's more money in what I do. And you don't want to mess up the market system that works to bring out of people what their best talents are. But the market system is not perfect in any kind of distribution of wealth. And taxation is a way where you get to the excesses of what the market system produces, and where you take care of the people that get the short straws. In a country as prosperous as we are, nobody should get a really short straw.
Some people are going to hear you say that now and say, Warren's talking about sharing the wealth. There he goes.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about sharing the prosperity. There's no question about that. I am prosperous because of the society around me. Stick me down in some poor country, and I'll walk around saying, I allocate capital, and they'll say, so what? What we need is a guy with a strong back, and I don't have a strong back.
Can you row a boat or something?
Do something like that. So society, listen, when a couple of middleweights fight it out on pay-per-view this weekend, and get $49.95 from me or whatever it may be, and I can't remember their names 2 weeks later, they are benefiting not because of their own talent that much, but because some guy invented television and then invented cable television and learned how to change a stadium of 15,000 people into a stadium of 300 million. So they benefit from society. We all do. And some like me benefit enormously from society. I can't do it by myself. Stick me on a desert island, and you do not want to be on that same island.
There is this also. The Bush administration says that when the economic crisis came, they treated it with a tactic, which was doing what they did. They worry that what the Obama administration is doing is a strategy to put in place a different attitude about the relationship between the government and the economy.
Yeah, I don't think the Obama administration wants the government to take over the economy, but they did. They took on a situation, and incidentally, I give credit to the Bush administration in that last 4 or 5 months of 2008. I mean, a lot of right things were done. I mean, when George Bush said, if money doesn't ease up, if money doesn't ease up, this sucker can go down. Now, that was one of the most profound economic statements ever made. I mean, he became the economist in chief, as far as I was concerned at that point. But so I give them credit too. But the Obama administration, they're not running General Motors because they want to run General Motors. I mean, it isn't like that Barack Obama grew up with some great itch to run the whole American economy. They're doing what?
Oh, he might want to buy a railroad, though.
Yeah, well,
that's said to be a fun game.
Can't buy it from me.
But go ahead. It's a good point.
But they are doing what is necessary in their view to get this economy righted. And like, nobody makes perfect decisions on this. And they're doing things I'm sure they don't like to do. I don't think they want to run General Motors, or Chrysler or anything of the sort.
Or own AIG.
Or
especially own AIG.
That is no fun. Or prop up Freddie and Fannie and all that
so
sort of thing.
All these people who think that somehow there's some new idea about, and they use the word socialism, but something else in terms of,
Barack
you
Obama,
don't buy that.
Barack Obama wants a much more prosperous economy, embodying the principles that have made it prosperous. But I think he does want to make sure that the bottom 20 or 30% does better than it's done in the last 20 years while the top has prospered so much.
That brings us to the question, beyond whether Congress has the will or not, there is this idea, which is how do you create a new regulatory platform and architecture? And you've got, on the one hand, the administration comes in and says, let the Federal Reserve do it. Then you have Chris Dodd says, no, don't do that. And then Barney Frank says, I'm somewhere halfway in between. Where is Warren Buffett?
I am 100% for the independence of the Fed.
Right.
I mean, if you have a central bank that is bowing to the will of Congress, either directly or indirectly through some of various mechanisms, it would be a disaster.
Wants to be in on their monetary decisions or oversight or whatever.
You got to hope you've got a good Fed chairman and some good members, and we've done that generally. If Paul Volcker was, he was essential to this country coming out of that 1979-82 period, like we did. Ben Bernanke was essential to keeping us from going into the abyss last September. We need an independent Fed, and I think every country needs an independent central bank.
But does that mean they should be the regulator as well?
Somebody has to regulate, and banks do need regulation.
Do we need one regulator, one big regulator that will?
Well, if it was me, I would like it. I mean, because you need somebody that does have a big stick.
Yeah.
I mean, if left to their own devices, people will take on too much leverage. They may not this year or next year or anything, but financial institutions, particularly if they're promising they're going to increase their earnings per share every quarter, and they'll do off-balance sheet things and all of these sins that were committed a few years ago. Freddie and Fannie did a lot of them too, and they were regulated by Congress.
And had 200 regulators marching in the office every day.
So we've had Congress regulate the two of the 5 or 6 most important financial institutions in the United States, and it was a total flop. So it's tough being a regulator, but you want somebody that is independent, somebody that's got real muscle, and hopefully somebody that has an understanding of what you need to do to keep the system working well too.
And that's the Federal Reserve.
I think they're good at it. They weren't perfect this time around, but Congress wasn't perfect either.
But once the problem came, they responded, and you have untold admiration for Bernanke.
If he hadn't have had the authority he had, and maybe if he even hadn't thought he had a little more authority than he even did have last fall, I mean, there's something to that.
Yes.
I mean, you had to have somebody that would step up, guarantee money market funds, keep commercial paper flowing, do these things that not many people could have done, and certainly Congress couldn't have done them with the speed. And speed was absolutely essential. I mean, you did not have a lot of time to save this patient.
And they understood that.
They really understood it.
And reacted. And gained a lot of power and used it. There's also this, you cannot establish a particular leverage ratio, can you? You can't say that 15 to 1 is as far as it should ever be.
No, if you have a bank that owns nothing but short-term government bonds, they can have 50 to 1, and if you got them, they've got a whole bunch of money lent out to other guys who are leveraged in various ways and various speculative things. 5 to 1 is too much. So pure numbers don't work.
So what works?
That's the problem. That is the problem.
That's why.
No, I mean, if you could stick a bunch of ratios out there, it'd be all over.
But what works? I mean, it's the problem. Give me a possible way of dealing with the problem.
I would like to have a very smart, strong regulator that understood the nuances of different kinds of leverage and what it might mean, and one who would be willing not only to use those rules at individual institutions, but who would speak out to the country. Can't speak out too often and have it meaningful, but who would speak out to the country about a generalized problem, because that's what we needed. It wasn't the fact that it was Bank A or Bank B or Bank C. What was happening was that you were having a bubble that everybody was joining in and speaking out on that, which requires a lot of guts. And it may even get ignored, although if it comes from somebody that is running the Fed, or whomever, or the President of the United States. I mean, there can be people that will have an impact on that.
You've said that you're not in favor of too much coddling and that you'd like to see the stick used more.
Absolutely.
Tell us what you mean.
Well, what I mean is that if you run a financial institution, and its financial institutions overwhelmingly do tend to create the problems because there's this aggregation of capital. And if you run a financial institution that, in effect, can bring down the system, unless the federal government steps in.
Right.
If you get to that point, I think something very bad should happen to you. I don't think you should walk away with a lot of money, or even with 10% of your previous net worth or anything of the sort. And I think the directors who selected you and let you operate in that manner should have some real downside. I'm not for shooting them, but I'm for making.
But the threat of would be.
I think I want to make it painful for them. I mean, if they're going to
painful would be they can't buy insurance.
No, I would probably have, in terms of the very large financial institutions, that if they had to go to the government, and the government had to act, because there are going to always be too big to fail institutions. It drives regulators crazy, but that's the reality of it. And if an institution comes in and says, if we go down, we're pulling the whole country down with us, I think that the directors and the CEO of an institution like that, I think the directors say, you should certainly have to give back, they should 5 times the highest fee they've received in the previous year, because you're sitting around those places now getting $200,000 to $300,000 a year, and for all I want for my $200,000 to $300,000 a year is somebody that is selecting and designing a compensation system for the person they put in charge, the CEO, who should be the chief risk officer. I want them to have a system that penalizes that person very, very significantly. And if they don't create that kind of, if they pick the wrong person or they let that person go off the reservation, I want them to pay also.
All right. So let me just, you want there to be a penalty for directors who do not do their job.
Yeah.
But you recognize that there are going to be financial institutions that are too big to fail. It has been and will continue to be. You can't simply say we're going to let anybody fail, no matter how big, no matter what the consequences.
No, we're not just going to have a mom and pop bank on every corner, and it isn't going to work.
Do you think that the financial community has any sense of I'm sorry?
Well, most of them didn't do it. I mean, in the sense that if you take the leaders of these institutions that got them in, a lot of them are gone. Now, they're gone with more money than I would like to have them gone with. And I think what's infuriating to the American public, if you take the people in Omaha,
exactly.
they have seen lots of unemployment. They've seen, many cases their homes or their friends' homes foreclosed. They've seen all these things happen to them. And nobody's gone to jail, and as far as they're concerned, the leaders of institution A, B, or C that have, in a big way, contributed to these problems, they may be worth $10 million instead of $100 million or something like that. But they don't see anybody going to jail. They don't see anybody being held very responsible for it.
And they don't believe that if they were in the same place, a much lower investment, that anybody would have come along and taken care of them.
Well, yeah, and they're right about that. I mean, if I have a tiny little business that fails, it doesn't affect the United States. But if you have Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae
or AIG or
Citicorp, they would have affected. I mean, we could not stand those dominoes falling, and it drives people crazy that we couldn't, but we couldn't. I mean, if a few more dominoes had fallen, if that weekend of September 12th, the 14th, or whatever it was, if one more domino, then Merrill Lynch going, Morgan Stanley would have been next. The dominoes were so lined up and they were so big that
without the government, they would have gone down.
They would have gone down. But bear this in mind. They talk about moral hazard on this. There isn't any moral hazard. If you look at Citi, 90% of the market value has disappeared. If you look at Freddie Mac, 90% of the market value of the common, more than that's disappeared.
Look at AIG.
Fannie Mae, AIG, all of them. So the stockholders have gotten totally creamed. The owners have gotten totally creamed. So it's not like anybody that was a stockholder of Citi or Freddie or Fannie or AIG or you name it is thinking, the system's going to save me, because it didn't save them. They got killed. But the guys at the top did not get, in most cases, did not get killed, and they're the ones that made the mistake.
And should they have gotten killed, so to speak?
It should have been harder.
And so how would the government have done that?
I would probably have something with those kind of institutions where no one got rich from running an institution like that until about 5 years after they left. I mean, I'd have had it very restricted, and I'd have clawbacks, and I'd be plenty tough, and I'd be tough on the directors if they hadn't put in those kind of arrangements.
Now, they say that now. If you listen to these financial executives today, they say, we're in favor of clawbacks, and we've instituted those kinds of things. I don't know whether they have.
Well, they've done some, but I'd probably square
it. You make it exponentially
better. And I wouldn't let them buy, against this sort of risk, I wouldn't let them buy directors' officers insurance, liability insurance.
Right.
We don't have that at Berkshire. I mean, if our shareholders are going to go down, I want me to go down with them and the directors to go down with them. I mean, we've taken on the job, and if the ship goes down, we should not get the first lifeboat.
When you look at that year. This is a book by Andrew Sorkin.
It's a very good. It's a very good book. It's a very good book.
You're in there. Moments for you. I mean, you were at the other end of phone calls from people who
wanted money.
You wanted money. And in some cases, advice, but mostly money.
Mostly, yeah. Money. They take money before. There's a choice between money and advice, right?
They'll take money. And so they mostly wanted money. You know, are there moments you look back in which you said no that you might have said yes? I mean, do you have any sense of...
You just call you.
I know you do.
I mean, it's just like standing there at the plate. That pitch comes there. You got a half a second to decide whether to swing. And, you know,
I know you're not a man to agonize, but I mean,
I could have done way smarter things. I did not optimize the period.
Right. Exactly. Because you had money and they needed money, and they would have given up a lot for that money.
Yeah. Plus, the bottom of the market was 6 months later. I mean, and it was significantly lower. So if I just save the money, just put it in the market 6 months later, I'd have done way better than making these deals.
Right.
But I didn't know that at the
time. So you said, I'm optimistic, but I'm not sure my optimism is justified.
Well, I don't try and pick bottoms. No,
yeah,
I really, when I get a call and it makes sense and I've got the money, I do it. You know, and I don't think I can do this better tomorrow or the next day or that sort of thing. But most of the things didn't make sense.
Yeah, but here's something else you've taught me as well. You don't get that many swings at the bat.
Not with big sums.
With big sums, yeah.
With big sums.
You know, I mean, so if you look at Burlington Northern, I mean, that was a big sum.
Yeah, and you don't get bargains on things like that. It's not cheap, but
that was a bargain.
No, it's not a bargain.
I didn't think so. That's what I'm asking.
No. But it's a good asset to own for Berkshire over the next century.
But does it restrict how many? Suppose tomorrow a great thing came along that you didn't know. Would you say, "Oh my God"?
Well, it could happen. I mean, if the Union Pacific came along at half the prices of Burlington, but I don't worry. I don't worry about that sort of thing at all, Charlie.
So we look back at this time. For one who loves understanding what's going on and where it's going. You've said to me before, you know, you might sacrifice the last year of your life if somebody would come along and say, Warren, I can tell you what the next 40 years are going to look like. All the questions you have, I can answer.
Or just let me watch. Just let me watch the next 40 years. Yeah, the last year, you know, you don't get to be here, but the next 40 years you get to watch. Kind of like Chauncey Gardner, you like to watch.
So as we put a cap on this, we're going to come out of this okay.
Absolutely.
We've got some real problems we have to deal with. The deficit is one. How we learn the lessons of this in terms of finding some kind of regulation that works, and have confidence that we got here because we had unique kinds of skills. Go back to 1776 and see what a few group of people did, and where we are today makes you an optimistic about America, but also optimistic about the world. As the center of gravity moves to Asia.
It's wonderful that the lessons we learned over the last couple hundred years, you know, are being absorbed in many parts of the world. I mean, people have seen success and they've had the sense to copy some of that and get into their own system those ingredients that have done it for us. But we haven't lost the ingredients. In fact, that they're able to use the ingredients does not take it away from us. And you know, every year of my life, I could sit down at the start of the year and write on a pad a dozen things that were looming over the economy. When people say, I'm not buying stocks now because times are uncertain, I say to them, well, on September 10th, 2001 were times certain. Yeah, you thought they were certain, but you found out the next day they weren't. You know, on October 18th, 1987, before the day before the Dow took that 22%, things are always uncertain in the short term. What really is certain is that the things that worked over time will continue to work over time. So the next day is always uncertain. The next hour is always uncertain. The longer term is pretty darn certain.
Warren, thank you.
Thank you.
It's always great to see you. Warren Buffett for the hour. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.